good morning, afternoon, or evening, and welcome to the Bloody Disgusting Network. The following show is just horrifying. Beware.
You're obsessed with her, and you're obsessed with her daughter!
All right, easy, Geraldo.
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking psychedelic maelstroms. We're talking A Shadow with a Thorny Crown. And we're talking Patrick Schwarzenegger stripping for grades. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we're talking some really intense deep-throating.
Oh my god, yes.
Ooh, yes, yes. I guess, how would we say that? Patrick Schwarzenegger deep-throating...
No.
Miles Robbins?
It's forcibly inserting yourself into a deep throat?
It's literally deep-throating.
I'm making hand motions that I wish people could see.
He is literally deep-throating... Well, whatever, it's fine. Yeah, so we're talking... We're talking Adam Egypt Mortimer's Daniel Isn't Real, y'all. A film that I am prepared to die on a hill saying it is a modern classic, and I know that's terrible to say, but fuck it, I'm saying it anyway.
No, this is an absolutely great film, kind of criminally underseen. I feel like the people who like it a lot, but I feel like it needs a bigger audience.
You know, it's one of those films... I went through my timeline here because it was a South by Southwest film back in 2019. And actually, and I apologize if anyone who's a South by Southwest programmer is listening to this, it was a year that I didn't think the genre offerings were really that good. And this was the first film, along with the the one we like to bring up a lot is the Helen Hunt ICU movie. Mm-hmm. This was the movie that I saw and I was like, oh, thank God, like something good.
Yep.
But, Joe, I mean, we've got a lot to unpack here. In case you haven't seen this movie, of course, we will be going into spoilers. So make sure you have seen the film, because if it was shitty, we would just say fuck it and listen to us. But in this case, I really do think it's important to have seen the film.
Okay.
But we need someone to help us unpack this. So, everyone, he is the owner, founder, and editor-in-chief of Gaily Dreadful, your one-stop shop for all things queer horror. He is also the co-host of the Scarred for Life podcast, which looks at all the films that scared us as kids. He's also the editor of We Are Horror, a bi-monthly genre e-magazine whose content creators are 80% comprised of, at minimum, creators who are women, BIPOC, and members of the queer community. He also has a day job.
How?
On top of all these things. Of course, he's also a returning guest, making up for his way too long absence ever since we discussed Final Destination over 2 years ago. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Terry Mesnard.
Hey.
Y'all, I just gotta say, it was so hard to not crack up, Trace, while you were talking about deep throating. I just gotta get that out there, because I'm like sitting over here trying to be like, I'm not trying to tease that I'm here, but you guys are making me laugh. It's not fair.
It's what I do.
We try to make people giggle in the corner. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk about this movie. This movie is absolutely a modern day classic. I have to agree.
Well, I mean, so you, of course, know this. You know, we obviously want to have you back. We love you. But you wanted this film specifically. Joe, did you even send him a list? Or was he like, are y'all covering Daniel Isn't Real soon?
No, I absolutely did send him the list, but it was kind of like, if Daniel Isn't Real is going to be on that list, I claim it immediately.
Pretty much, yes, because this movie is fantastic. I love it has like that queer subtext, and I'm sure we're gonna dive right into
yes,
as much as Daniel was diving into Lou.
Yes, I was waiting for it.
But there's so much going on in this, and what I love about this movie, and why I completely agree with you that it is a modern classic, is there's so many different ways that you can take a look at this film. You can explore it from so many different angles, and I'm so excited to do that.
Well, there are obviously people that don't like this film. You know, not every film's going to be a winner for everybody. But
who are they?
Well,
call them out. Name and shame.
As with any film that deals with mental illness, as this one very much does,
right,
it's going to have some strong opinions. And I'm intrigued, excited, and a little bit nervous to dive into how this film deals with those things. Because I think there's a positive way to look at it, but I also think there is a really negative and potentially problematic way of looking at this film.
Right. Yeah. That's, I think, one of its strengths. Like you suggested, Terry, there's so many different ways to read this film. And I'm actually reminded a little bit of the episode that you and I did for Patreon and then later released on the main feed, Trace, the Taking of Deborah Logan, where I think we can have some similar conversations about these films that take mental illness as their entryway and then actually say, oh, it's not mental illness, it is literally demons or literally evil or something like that.
I will say, an interesting movie marathon. It won't be fun, but an interesting movie marathon. So we can do Daniel Isn't Real. We can do The Babadook. We can do Taking of Deborah Logan, and then maybe finish it out, or maybe start it, because this is probably the most egregious example of the bunch, but like include Lights Out, which I do think that film got a lot of flack for something that, in a way, it handles mental illness. And I do think that people that don't like this probably feel similarly about it. Like, I think they think it makes a lot of the same mistake that Lights Out does in its treatment of the topic.
You know, I think that this is sort of this kind of same subject matter as people who either relate to or are repulsed by the rape revenge subgenre, where, you know, every person that either suffers from it or has, you know, been a victim of or has survived it, I think have different readings of films. Because, I mean, I was looking initially about, like, mental health in this movie, and I saw some articles, like the one from Jerry Smith at Dread Central, that says that he saw himself seen for the first time because of dealing with the idea of, like, suicidal ideation and that kind of thing. So I do think that there are, you know, it's not a monolith. There are people are going to react to any movie about mental illness in different ways, I think.
Yeah. There's nuance there, we can say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's just go right in, because I do have a bit of production, because, I'm going to humble brag, though. So I did buy the DVD for this. I don't know why I didn't buy it before. But if you would like a piece of entertainment with my name on it, please go buy the DVD of Daniel Isn't Real, because my name and pulled quote from my 4.5 out of 5 star review is on this DVD.
Hell
it's
yeah.
the best you'll get until Trace finally starts his OnlyFans account.
Pretty much, yes. No, the OnlyFans is coming.
Oh my god, Freudian slip. I'm keeping that in.
It's not really coming, though. I'm not doing an OnlyFans. Although my husband has told me to do it just so we can get money. So, I don't know. Let me know if y'all are interested.
No,
not
do
you
not.
two.
No. Hard pass. Thank you, but no.
So Daniel Isn't Real. It's directed by Adam Egypt Mortimer from a screenplay by himself and Brian DeLue. But the film is actually based upon the latter's novel, In This Way I Was Saved. So this was their second time writing a feature-length screenplay together. The first one was 2015's Some Kind of Hate, which is a film that also looks at a serious topic, in this case bullying and a lot of self-harm, through a horror lens. Have either one of you seen that film?
I have not.
I have.
And by your tone, I take it that you don't think it's as successful as this film.
No. I remember I watched it in prep. I mean, to humble brag on my own, I mean, I did get to talk to Adam Egypt Mortimer on my podcast. And so I wanted to watch this film as sort of like to understand his filmmaking style before I talked to him. And that movie just did not do it for me. And I just don't know if it was because I was in the glow of Daniel Isn't Real and it just didn't work as well. But I don't think it was very successful in what it was trying to do.
Without going too deep, because I know we're not talking about this film, but like I said, it takes a look at something that's very serious. Again, like the results of bullying and like what that does to you as a person, and how it can affect your mental health. And that's really interesting. The problem is it's also kind of a generic slasher film. And those two films are constantly at war with each other. And unfortunately, the generic slasher wins over. So you want it to go deeper, and it really just ends up scratching the surface a lot.
Interesting, because even having not seen it, that description can see the genesis or maybe the kernel of how Daniel Isn't Real came about, because I have seen a lot of people say, oh, it feels like there's a couple of different genres at work in Daniel Isn't Real, and ultimately it's kind of like one wins out in the end.
Yeah, and bear in mind, I'm fine with a generic slasher. The problem is that the movie Some Kind of Hate is a very angry movie because it deals with very angry characters. And because of that, it's not a fun generic slasher. It's very upsetting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've watched it, but I remember being very uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
And maybe that was the point. I mean, authorial intent in that and whatnot, but like it was not a movie that I enjoyed watching, and it did not work for me.
I totally get that. I do think that Mortimer is a better director than he is a writer. not to say I think he's a bad writer, but I think he's a much more accomplished director than he is a writer because he has either written or co-written all of his 3 films. I feel like I should also point out that Daniel Isn't Real is part 1 of Mortimer's Vortex trilogy. So this is his second film, but his first entry in this Vortex trilogy. The next film is Arch Enemy, a film with Joe Manganiello that came out actually back in December. It's very recent. It's more of a thematic link between the films in the trilogy, and that it's very much like the cosmic horror type thing.
Right.
Both films do start with a look at some kind of space void thing. But Mortimer does say, and I quote, "Mark my words, we are going to make a third movie in the Vortex trilogy that will have Daniel, from Daniel Isn't Real, return and force Max, who is Joe Manganiello from Arch Enemy, in some form to deal with it. A crisis on infinite vortices, pulling together as many of the characters from both stories as we can fit for a true cosmic horror / cosmic action crossover hybrid."
Jesus, that sounds ambitious, and maybe like he's been watching some MCU films.
A little bit.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up because I was immediately thinking of M. Night Shyamalan and
I was
his
thinking that
Glass
too.
and
Yeah.
Split and, Unbreakable, how, Unbreakable and Split seem 2 different kinds of movies, and then they all get put together in the third one.
Actually,
Right.
That's a really good comparison because I saw so many people comparing Arch Enemy to James Gunn's Super or even something like Watchmen.
Okay.
But I think your comparison to Glass and Split actually does make a lot more sense.
Interesting. And of course, we talked about Glass previously on the Patreon. That was our second Patreon episode way back in the day. But that would be interesting, if only because I know so many people are split on how successful that film is at merging its 2 previous entries. And Terry, you do not like it.
I did not like it at all.
So my husband to this day still has not seen Glass because he was like, I just heard it wasn't very good. And I'm sitting there in the corner like, I actually kind of liked it.
we liked it back in the day.
Yeah, we did. It's not what you expect, but
Right.
I still think it's a good movie. But anyway.
I mean, we're not talking about that trilogy here, but also I just got to say that my problem might be that I watched all 3 back to back in a movie theater.
Yeah.
And so I saw Unbreakable, which I think is amazing. I saw Split, which I thought is really good.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw the third one and I'm like,
Right.
Meh.
Tonal whiplash, too.
yeah.
It's not as bombastic. Like, it's very much like it's a more, like, close personal story, I feel like. But it's just, like, I can see how narratively you'd be like, oh, that just kind of, like, womp womp, like, whimper, whimper, whimper. That's how it ends.
Well, it privileged... Yeah, you know what, folks? Go back and listen to our Glass episode. We talk it all through.
So, okay, back to this film, Daniel Isn't Real, because that is the film we're discussing today. In case you forgot.
Oh, we are?
Despite being based on Deleu's book. Oh, and I do want to point out, too, that Deleu co-wrote some kind of hate with Mortimer as well.
Mm-hmm.
But Mortimer had already read Daniel Isn't Real prior to that. So I think it was like a thing where he was like, hey, I love your book. Let's write a movie together. Also, now let's adapt your book together.
Now let's do the movie I really want to do.
Yeah, but even though this film is based on that book, it does take quite a few liberties. I mean, and I don't have, like, obviously, like, a list. Like, for example, like, in the novel, there's not a storyline about Daniel having possessed someone else before. So we don't really, like, it is suggested, like, there's a dead body at the beginning and a kid who kills himself, but the novel doesn't do anything with that outside of just saying, this happened. And I think that's actually a step in the right direction for the film, personally, because I actually really like that reveal.
Right.
I do too, and I definitely want to talk about that once we get to it, because I think it actually makes this movie a lot more interesting and adds another dimension to it that I probably is lacking from the book.
A whole other dimension? Like one of infinite cosmic
vortices. So I listened to Mortimer's commentary on this film today, which I don't always listen to commentary, but because there's not a lot of information about this film, because it is relatively new, I was like, you know what? Let's see what's going on here. His commentary, he's very technical, but, like, it's not a dry commentary. Like, sometimes you can watch commentaries and it's like, well, the sun was out today and we brought out the camera and we shot it and, we blah, blah. And I was like, okay, that's fine, but, like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Tell us about craft services, you bitch.
I know. Tell us about all the juicy gossip and, like, all the sex that Miles Robbins and Patrick Schwarzenegger were having off screen.
Oh my God, one can dream.
Can you imagine?
I mean, what? Who said that?
But I will say that Mortimer he wants everyone to know up front, he did not go to film school. But he is very...
I'm sorry, what? Are you fucking kidding me?
He did not go to film school.
I am shocked because this movie is so expertly crafted, and I have seen his tweets. Like, when this movie came out, I was really following it in terms of, like, its rollout release, and he is so thoughtful and careful about how this movie is constructed. I'm honestly gagged right now.
Well, let me tell you. So basically, he gave everyone in the crew a 40-page style guide for this film. He color-coded the script based on the tone or mood of the scene to determine which lens, lighting, etc. to use for each scene.
Wow.
He does divide the film into 3 kind of pseudo-acts. Like, he has isolation, which is roughly the first 20 to 25 minutes. Manic, or mania, which is, when Daniel and Luke are going through there, like, hey, let's have fun together.
Mm-hmm.
And then Max Subjective, which is basically the last, 30, 40 minutes of the movie, where Luke has lost control of his mind or his otherness.
So what I'm hearing is that he has kind of constructed the Garden of Earthly Delights, which is a painting that is referenced in the film. It's a triptych where the left side is representing, I think, like an Eden state. The middle section is everyone kind of enjoying themselves frivolously, and then the right section is hell.
Wow.
Okay. See, not something I would have caught, Terry. But even from the language of cinema, for most of the film, super wide shots were shot on a spherical lens, whereas the rest of the movie was shot on anamorphic. But then when we get to the exorcism scene later with the Dr. Braun, he switches it. He changes the rules of how he's filming the film, and we get objective and anamorphic wide shots in that scene and moving forward. And that's something where it's okay, I'm not gonna notice that you're switching out the camera or a lens for a film to tell me how I'm supposed to feel during this scene. But then I do feel like it's also the subconscious thing, right? Where it's I'm not recognizing visually that this thing is happening, but no matter what, that is affecting how I'm seeing the film.
Right.
So, that's his kind of visual aesthetic going on here. For the score, he wanted to go for a Bernard Herrmann type score that would then be dropped into and he calls this a thresher of sorts.
An industrial thresher.
Yes, exactly. And Terry, Joe kind of clued me into this, but you have something to say about the score?
I love Clark, the composer of this score. I think he does such a fantastic job of combining what you just said, of taking the sort of industrial tones and the kind of post-electronic tones that we are seeing now, where he's taking the stuff that I grew up listening to in the 90s, like Nine Inch Nails and whatnot. He takes that and he does give it that sort of orchestral type combination. And I think that it kind of comes together to represent both sides of Daniel and Luke, because you have the sort of menacing industrialness, and then you also have the sort of typical orchestral aspect of it. And it's just, I love his work. And he actually, if you go listen to the album, Clark resequenced the album to make it sound like an actual album and not like a score.
Oh, okay, next scene this, next scene this. So it flows better, or more seamlessly.
Yep. So that you can listen to it as if you were listening to kind of an electronica album.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And folks, as a side plug, Terry and I actually spent quite a fair amount of time talking about Clark, because he ended up doing the score for Apple TV's Leezy Story, which we ended up covering on the Anatomy of a Scream Pod Squad Network.
Joe, we discussed this. You can't talk about your other podcast when I'm right here.
Side plugs. It's like my side cheating plug, okay?
It's a hot piece on the side.
No, that's great, though. I'm really happy for you both. Have fun.
Which means Trace has never listened to a single episode and won't.
Okay, I have not started watching Leesy's Story, so it doesn't count.
Yeah, it's fine.
And also, your 2.5-star review of the entire season makes me not want to watch it.
It has some messy parts, but the score is not one of them. The score is actually pretty good.
Which he also got because of the score. The director Pablo Larraín loved the score and was need you.
Yeah.
Well, at least that's good though, right? Because even though we're saying that this movie is underseen, it's clearly not underseen in the business.
Right.
I don't know. But yeah, so when discussing this film, so Mortimer says that at the center of the film, we've got a story about how we want to be good people, but there are voices inside of us, or impulses, that suggest we do bad things. There's a universal theme, a human theme, about the darkness inside of us. And it's also a film that deals with toxic masculinity and incel culture, and how men take out their anger and frustration on women. And this is kind of the first thing he says in this commentary, which I thought was interesting, because he was at first staying away from the mental illness metaphor of the film. He was very much Daniel's representative of that little voice inside of us, but I'm also kind of yeah, but he's a demon.
Right.
Yep.
He was kind of ignoring that part of it, and so I was like, okay, so maybe this is his first and foremost how he's approaching this material, how he's writing this material. That being said, he also states there's a 3-part metaphor in the movie where we look at 1, mental illness, of course, literally manifesting it as a demon and fighting it on a rooftop. But he also is adamant. He goes, this isn't a movie that is purely about mental illness. It's just that it's comparable to wrestling with a demon. When the movie starts talking about the cosmos, the human condition is inherited trauma that comes from the cosmic womb, which sounds really gross to me. Cosmic womb. I can't even do that. But the other 2 metaphors he brings up are A, undiagnosable human suffering, and B, supernatural/demonic/cosmic realms. But that kind of ties back into what you were saying earlier, Joe, in that there are so many different ways to watch, absorb, interpret this film. And I think Mortimer's aware of that, which is why he tries to cover as many bases as he can in this commentary. But it's just like, I don't think you can do this film justice trying to unpack all of that as you're watching it.
No, you'd almost need to have 3 different commentaries focusing on different aspects of it.
Yes.
There's so much that is going in so many different directions that it seems like it would be very difficult to do.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's one of the struggles that people have with this. So I remember, as I mentioned, I was following the rollout of this very eagerly because I kept missing it at different film festivals. Yeah. And then I was like, okay, when is this finally going to become available? I would sign up to cover a festival, see that it was playing, immediately ask for it, and then be like, oh, they're actually not going to provide screeners for that one. You have to be there in person. And I was never there in person.
Same, Joe. Same.
It was so frustrating.
Because normally at film festivals, most films, unless they're a big screening. So this film was at South by Southwest, the same year that Pet Sematary, the remake, was out, and The Curse of La Llorona. It had 2 screenings. I skipped the first one because I was like, you know what? I have other films, like other genre films that I think are more for me. Okay. This was a film I wasn't really excited to review because I was like, ooh, cosmic horror. I didn't really like Mandy that much. It's not really going to be for me. And also, pre-word of mouth wasn't that good for this because people were really judging it based on the fact that Patrick Schwarzenegger was the co-star.
Yeah, I think that there was some misconceptions about what this was going to be. Like, I remember seeing that there were stories about Hollywood nepotism and him getting this role, because if you think about it, it actually has 2 famous people's children in the lead roles, right?
Yeah.
So here's the thing. Yes, everyone, in case you don't know, Patrick Schwarzenegger is obviously the child of Maria Shriver and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Miles Robbins is the son, the straight son I'm sorry, maybe this is rude, but I say straight, but he also does dress and wear dresses, which I really respect a lot. Like, this is a cisgender heterosexual man who wears dresses openly in public, and I'm like, you know what? I admire that in you, Miles Robbins, but he is the son of Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon.
Yes.
I don't disagree that there is nepotism at play here, but I'm also kind of like, A, they both do really well, so I'm not watching this like, oh wow, this would have been better if anyone else was in this role. But I'm also kind of like, this is clearly a low-budget film, and I can guarantee you that having the prodigies of 2 very, very, very famous and wealthy acting families is going to be good for getting a distribution deal.
Yeah. And even then, it still had its share of troubles. Like, this isn't a big film. It's not that it ended up breaking out because it had these well-known, recognizable children of famous people.
I mean, I will tell you right now, I didn't put the Miles Robbins thing together until in the past year. I had seen him in Blockers, which, P.S., if you've never seen Blockers, he is one of the highlights of that film.
Oh, he absolutely is.
He's so funny. And I saw him in Halloween 2018 because he plays the exact same character he plays in Blockers, but with a lot less screen time.
Right.
So I really appreciated seeing him in this movie because it was just something different. It was something I hadn't seen from him. And I think Robbins pulls this part off with aplomb, even though it is the less, quote-unquote, showy role between Luke and Daniel.
Until he becomes Daniel, and then you suddenly realize, holy shit, he is really adept at balancing both of those performances.
Agreed. The switch is so fucking fun. So, okay, I'll wrap up. So, this film does have its world premiere at South by Southwest. This is March 9th, 2019. I probably saw it 4 days later because I skipped that first screening. Bad me. Shortly after, Samuel Goldwyn Films acquired distribution rights to the film. It was released on DVD and VOD on December 6th, 2019. It had a very positive reception. We were looking at an 84% on Rotten Tomatoes, with an average score of 7.1 out of 10, and a Letterboxd score of 6.4 out of 10. So I think that is interesting. It's an I mean, again, it's like, less than a point across, but it's still like 3 out of 5 versus a 3.5 to a 4 out of 5.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that is Daniel Isn't Real, and
no, it's not. That's the production. Now we have to talk about the movie.
We're done, guys. That was good.
We're done. Bye. That is the production of Daniel Isn't Real. Joe, please, by all means, give us your plot summary.
Okay. So we open with, as we've mentioned a couple of times, a swirling cosmic maelstrom. And then we properly commence the film with young Luke, who is played by Griffin Robert Faulkner, and he is observing his parents fight, so he runs out of the house. He ends up coming upon a very grisly crime scene where a man has shot up a coffee shop, and then out of the blue, beside him appears a little dark-haired boy, played by Nathan Reed, and the two just kind of go off and play until he is collected by his mother, Claire, who's played by Mary Stuart Masterson. She comes to collect him, and this is where we get the introduction of this new friend who is going by the name of Daniel.
Did y'all want more Mary Stuart Masterson in this movie? Because I have to tell you, 2.5 scenes of her was not enough for me.
Yeah, I absolutely wanted more. I thought she was fantastic in this, and both really sad to watch, but then at sometimes really terrifying. Well, I'm sure we'll get to the scene later, but she really commands the screen whenever she's on it, for sure.
Oh, 100. I mean, admittedly, I really I know she's a famous actress. She actually does a lot of stage work that I didn't know about, but
right.
Fried Green Tomatoes is one of my absolute favorite films of all time, and
never seen it.
Oh my god. Terry, are you a Steel Magnolias fan, or have you not seen that either?
Seen what?
Steel Magnolias?
No.
Oh my god, okay. Okay, so, if the idea of Mary Stuart Masterson in a heavily coded lesbian relationship with Mary Louise Parker
Love her.
sounds very interesting to you, as they are, running a cafe in Louisiana that is told in flashback by Jessica Tandy to Kathy Bates. There's also Chris O'Donnell, and an entire scene where they kill someone, a racist guy, and cook him in barbecue and serve him to their restaurant patrons.
Oh my god.
If that sounds interesting to you, I highly recommend watching Fried Green Tomatoes.
That was not what I thought happened in Fried Green Tomato.
They literally, there's a racist, and they kill him, and they serve him in the barbecue. And there's a whole comedy gag when a cop is like, he's investigating, the disappearance. And he's like, this is damn good barbecue. What is in it? And you have Mary Stuart Masterson going, secrets in the sauce.
Jesus.
It's so good. But, literally, you'll cry. But it's a epitome of, lesbian, love affair type movie.
The 90s were wild.
It's so good. It's so fucking good, but I cry every time I watch it.
So Mary Stuart Masterson in this film. Yeah, I also wanted more of her. I find the transition between the children's stuff to the adult stuff just a touch jarring, because she seems relatively composed here, and I recognize, folks, we are talking about mental health issues. The gloves are... I was going to say the gloves are going to come off, but really I feel like I want to tread carefully here, because I recognize that just because she seems perfectly fine here doesn't mean that she isn't already suffering from the kinds of mental illness that she will describe later in the film.
Right.
I mean, when she's first introduced, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought she's smashing dishes and she is attacking her, I think, soon-to-be ex-husband.
Yeah.
And she's saying, I'm not me anymore when I take this medicine. And it cuts to Luke saying, we'll be okay, Wilbur. And then that's what leaves, is that his parents are fighting. So I do think that it sort of sets that up a little bit.
Yeah.
I think I just always see it as, his parents are fighting and he can't take it, so he leaves. But yeah, I do think you're right that is why they're fighting.
Watching this, I'm like, okay, well, what's wrong with her? Which is not really a good way of phrasing it. But I was very much like, okay, so this is bipolar. But then as the film moves along, it's kind of like, oh, this may be schizophrenia or bipolar meets schizophrenia. The film actually doesn't take any time or isn't interested in addressing the exact diagnosis. It's just that she is mentally unstable, mentally ill.
Mm-hmm. So she collects Luke and he brings Daniel back home with him. so that they can continue playing. And we get a bit of a montage about their friendship as it grows, and it seems very, I was going to say chaste, but then I realized, oh, that makes it sound like it's going to be sexual, which in a way it is.
I mean, people may combat us on this, right? They're going to be like, no, they're just friends, guys. But there are very homoerotic sexual undertones, if only because of how many times we're getting Schwarzenegger naked in this movie.
Oh, and we will talk about that once we get to those points in the plot, because I don't understand how someone could not say this movie is homoerotic at the very least.
At the very least, yeah. You can say it's not fully queer or that you wish it was more queer, but it's homoerotic at bare minimum.
When we talked to Adam, one of the first things he said when I brought it up talking to him, he said, I want people to think I am gay when they watch this movie.
Okay,
Oh.
that's awesome, because here's the thing. I've never spoken to this man. I actually get really nervous in interviews. I don't like giving interviews because it's not really starstruck. It's just more like, I just don't want this person to, like, my one interaction with this person to hate me for the rest of my life.
My God.
But I like that response, because it's even, you can have someone that's like, oh no, that wasn't intentional. Or you can have the, well, I didn't really intend that, but I'm happy for people to read into it however they want. Like, that's also kind of a cop-out answer to me, so that he said that, I really admire that.
Yeah, it really endeared me to him, I'll be honest.
Yeah, 100%.
Right.
So I do have a question about, you mentioned the montage, Joe, and they're using brooms to fight each other, and we get like this really kind of...
Definitely not a penis euphemism. What?
But we get like this castle, and all the brooms turn into swords and stuff, and
Right.
I was wondering if either of you either had imaginary friends growing up, or if you had like an overactive imagination.
So I didn't have a proper imaginary friend that I, played with or anything, because I had a very good relationship with my sister, so we spent a lot of time together. Or I was independently hanging out in my room. I read a lot as a child. But I remember I did create an imaginary friend when I was going on car trips, and it was just like a way to entertain myself by looking out the window. There would be like this animated character that would like bounce and run along with the car. So that's kind of the closest I got, but it was very much like a Looney Tunes Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
I love
kind of
that.
I did have an imaginary friend. His name was Luli.
Okay.
And I apparently invented him solely to blame things on him, because I would constantly draw on my walls with crayon, and I would constantly blame it. I mean, oh, Luli did it. I don't have any recollection, actually, of playing with Luli, but my parents said I did. Like, I 100% did. As a child, and even as a teenager, I was very, very, like, creative and imaginative. That has been lost on me as an adult. I'm very type A. I'm very much like follow the rules. A, B, C, black, white, yes, no, right, wrong.
I'm type A, and I still have way more imagination than that.
No, I know,
Don't be
I know.
blaming type A on your lack of imagination,
No,
sir.
so for me specifically, I'm to this day still surprised that I had an imaginary friend, because apparently I did play with this little fucker, and I lost. I have since lost. Like, it's every kid's movie, it's every Toy Story or whatever, where it's like, oh, I would be the villain in one of these children's movies because I'm the guy who used to be a fun child that was imaginative and lost his sense of fun and is trying to kill everyone else's fun with a sense of order. But yes, so long story short, I did. I had an imaginary friend named Luli, and I don't know if it was because I was lonely or anything. I don't know the causes for it. I've never really talked about it in therapy either, because it just didn't seem like that important of a part of my life. But I'm reconsidering that now. But you, Terry, please. I read your review for this film, and you have, I believe, some stories for us.
Well, I mean, I was just a very lonely kid. Like the first about 8-ish years of my life, I grew up in Alaska. Introvert, closeted queer kid. At that age, I didn't know that, what being gay was, but I knew I was different.
What years would this have been?
This would have been probably around like 84 maybe to 92 or 93 is when we lived in Alaska. And so it would have been the first, I was born in 81. So it would have been in between 5th and 6th grade we moved. So pretty much that entire time from when I was like 3 or so until 5th or 6th grade. But right. I had a hard time making friends. And up there in Alaska, like a lot of times people that lived there were in the military, so they'd be shipping out. So by the time I actually made friends, they would be leaving. And so
Right.
I never really had an imaginary friend, but I had a very overactive imagination. And the scene in particular where Luke and Daniel are sword fighting was like something that I did all the time, except I didn't think I was fighting someone. I just was out there slaying dragons. And
Right.
where it cuts to the mom looking in on him and he's just sort of swinging at the air, I'm like watching this going, oh my God, people probably thought I was just
That was you.
this little weirdo kid just swinging my sword out there in the streets of Alaska.
That's adorable, though.
It really is. And I do actually want to say, Terry, it worked out. This is like higher power shit. Because originally what this scene was going to be was Daniel and Luke building a sandcastle that would reach like a really tall height. Because the rooftop climax at the end was originally going to be an inverse of that, where they were both being sucked down into the roof as if it was quicksand.
Oh.
They did not have the budget for that.
Right.
So then it became sword fighting.
I'm glad it did, because it really just it spoke to me. And I think that's what a lot of kids do, especially kids that, have an overactive imagination.
Mm-hmm.
They'd be swinging, whatever they have, a broom on board, and be thinking, this is a sword and I'm,
I mean, did y'all ever play Hot Lava with yourself or with imaginary friends or with people? Because I 100% did.
Oh, absolutely. Although for me, I would put pillows on the floor and I would walk on them because I was watching like shark documentaries on television. I was terrified of touching the ground because a shark would get me.
So my sister and I bought the Milton Bradley. I think it was Milton Bradley. Maybe it was Parker Brothers. But the Jumanji game. I was really mad that it wasn't awesome looking like the game in the movie. It wasn't made of wood. but basically it was a thing where it's okay, you like when you go on a space, you draw a card and the card is like, whatever creature comes out to get you. My sister and I would like pretend like it was actually happening. So like if it was a piranha card, we'd be like, oh my God, the room is flooding. Climb on the couch. Make sure you don't fall into the piranhas are going to get you. Like, that's my imagination. That's imagination for kids.
Yeah. I love that.
So, in the film, this is all good and fine until Daniel overhears Claire, the mom, saying that just the two of them are going to be fine. And of course, she's talking about her and Luke. And this doesn't sit well with Daniel. He does not like to be left out. So, this is when he convinces Luke to poison her.
This, what a way to open a film, right?
Yeah, it's really rough to watch, if only because it's so obvious that Luke has no idea what's happening, and you really get the sense, immediately, if you're reading this film as an example of Luke is suffering from some kind of mental illness, it really becomes harder to make that argument even this early in the film, because your overactive imagination would not lie to you to poison your mother.
Yeah, and I even think visually speaking, like, we get the camera that zooms into the blender, so we get this kind of like, little swirl of the smoothie. That to me even ties it into the cosmic horror roots of the story in general.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The whole film has all of those kinds of shots like embedded throughout, just to remind you at all times, don't forget that this is a component of this film.
Well, and that's what I realized it may have sounded harsh when I was like, oh, Mortimer's a better director than he is a writer. But, like, watch the camera in this movie.
Yeah.
Mortimer and his cinematographer, Lyle Vincent, they know how to use a camera. And I do want to point out, too, Lyle Vincent's credits, besides Cooties, which, he's done The Bad Batch, Thoroughbreds, and A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. So, like, you've got Mortimer paired with a very accomplished cinematographer here, and it shows in this film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have a plot recap for us to go through, but honestly, so much of this film is encapsulated in the visuals and the way the camera moves, to the point where I'm like, yeah, we can talk about the story, but at the end of the day, you're missing things out if you just listen to us talk about it.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, thankfully, Claire does not die from this, but she does get quite sick, and when she realizes that it's because of Daniel that she almost died, she encourages Luke to lock him away in his grandmother's dollhouse, and we get the really striking imagery of the lights flashing inside the dollhouse and Daniel banging on the door.
I love this, not only for, like, the symbolism of it, but also because it's nice to see a parent that is working with the child on their level.
Oh, you mean like she doesn't disbelieve him. She's like, okay, we're going to do this thing so that it doesn't become more of a problem.
Yeah, like obviously I don't think for a second that she's sitting there going, okay, well, this Daniel thing is real and he's like corrupting my son. It's like, okay, let me play with this on my son's level and just say, hey, Daniel is real. Let's lock him up away because he is a bad influence on you. I don't know. It endears me to this character that Masterson is playing so much.
I mean, I think this is another kind of coded symptom that she is struggling from her own mental illness, that she is willing to meet him halfway. But also I'm like, your son nearly poisoned you. It's time to go into therapy.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Like, I don't know how to like delicately address that. I agree with. I agree with you. I agree with you.
So we then jump ahead, and Luke is now a college student who is played by Miles Robbins, and he is visiting his now very clearly visually coded mentally ill mother. So I love that we can see how far the house has fallen into disrepair in the interceding years. There's just papers everywhere. It looks like it hasn't been cleaned in ages. And after this, he then goes to a club where he is very clearly isolated. He's not engaging with anybody. He does see a girl that he wants to approach, but when he tries to cross the dance floor, he has a kind of epileptic fit in which he hallucinates something, but you could write it off as he just reacted to the strobe lights.
But what do y'all make of the faceless creatures he sees at the club?
I mean, they're amazing.
I just didn't know who it was remnants of Daniel's own mental illness. Or anxiety, even anxiety, like in a public place.
Yeah, it was just giving me like Jacob's Ladder vibes, and also I would say it kind of is what Daniel ultimately is revealed to be, but in a more surreal nature, and like it's the features haven't filled in yet, like sort of as if like it's that kind of a memory that's stuck there in his brain of what Daniel actually does look like.
And something like this, a scene like this where we're seeing pre-Daniel Luke deal with demons of some sort, it's I think what maybe will fuel people's negative perception of the film and how the film treats mental illness, because you can say, oh, like, yeah, Daniel is an embodiment of mental illness, blah, 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 but there was already something there before Daniel got there, or at least, like, since Daniel got there. Like, Daniel isn't the only demon that Luke is battling with.
Yeah, like an imprint, maybe? Like, he caught a glimpse of it when he was a child, and he's been carrying it around ever since. Because you get the impression that Daniel imprints on people, or he latches onto them, right? Like, that's why once he's freed, he can't just be put back into the dollhouse. It's because he's actually forged this connection with Luke.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, one thing I do want to mention is that you mentioned earlier about how this isn't all about the plot and whatnot, and it's the way that things are constructed. And there is one thing that I picked up on this watch, and it's because I was listening to this movie with noise-canceling headphones, is that thudding that Daniel does in when he's locked away continues into adulthood and continues up until the moment that he is released. So like the scenes where he is sitting up on the school and he's writing, you can kind of hear it in the background when he's walking down the street, his thudding when he's on the phone with his mom. There is a very quiet, rhythmic thud of Daniel pounding, waiting to get out.
Oh, wow.
And that's where these mental illness, like metaphors, allegories, whatever you want to say they are, that to me is the biggest, like, okay, this is what this movie is doing. I've said before, I don't suffer from any diagnosed mental illness. But I can only imagine what it feels like to have one. And I think that this oral and visual representation of what this film is doing, again, if we're taking Daniel as a representation of mental illness, even though in the film he's literally like a demon, it's interesting, creative, and fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when he wakes up from this fit, he decides that he is going to go and talk to somebody. So he reaches out to Dr. Cornelius Braun, who is played by Chikwadi Iwuji, and he talks a little bit about Daniel. So this is kind of a clarification that he remembers his childhood friend, but he doesn't go into detail about what actually happened with the poisoning of his mother.
This scene in particular really stuck out at me this time because of the language that's being used, where he says that, he can't faint like a Victorian duchess. So we have sort of gendered this idea of hysterics, or this idea of mental illness, where he talks about it reminded me a little bit of like the whole like Victorian phrase of I got the vapors, or the vapors, where people were just fainting, and it was typically ascribed to women. And so we have the situation where there's this character he obviously does not want to talk about this, but he's also a little bit afraid, but he's also kind of ingrained in this sort of toxic masculinity, patriarchal society that says men need to buck up. You can't be a wilting lily. You can't faint like a Victorian duchess. You have to just sort of own it and move on with your life. But of course, we know that he can't do that. But it's interesting of this sort of gendered socio-political language that's being utilized here.
Well, isn't this to the point where the doctor basically says, like, not loosen up in those words exactly, but it's like submit, open up, which are typically not masculine traits, I guess I would say.
Well, you can read a double meaning into it, right? Part of it is that Luke is not really living his life. He's very socially isolated, and the doctor is obviously saying, go out there, live your life, loosen up, just open up and be open to the universe and whatever it gives you. But yeah, it's also, we often tell women that they need to lighten up and that they need to be looser and that they shouldn't be so wound up.
Smile more.
Right. I think it's also worth making the observation that Miles Robbins, especially in comparison to Patrick Schwarzenegger, has a more soft, kind of rounded face, and like the hair is a little bit more floppish. So you can almost read a slightly coded feminine androgyny bit into it compared to especially Patrick Schwarzenegger.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So then after this, he has a literal run-in with his future paramour, skateboarder Cassie, who is played by Sasha Lane. And then cut to the middle of the night where Luke can't sleep, so he gets up and he ends up unlocking the dollhouse. And you could read it as he's either hearing the banging and he's attracted to it, or that he's almost sleepwalking and doing it unconsciously. But then this immediately goes into the scene where his mother is revealed to be cutting herself, and there's blood all over the walls, and she's threatening to die by suicide with a pair of scissors.
This is when we get Daniel in the bathtub, isn't it?
With rose petals.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. We are really linking the romance happening between Daniel and Luke at this point.
Like this, and this is where it starts, where it's like, I don't know how you cannot see this as homoerotic, because he is literally introduced naked in a bathtub with rose petals. Like, how much more romantic can that be?
What's interesting too, right? Because when Daniel actually begins commanding Luke and telling him how to solve the problem, he's fully clothed when he gets out of the bath. So it's only this initial image where it's like, hey girl, I'm back. Did you miss me? I'm like a gift waiting for you here in the bathtub.
It's kind of like the seduction, though, right? Like, oh, let me take off enough clothes just to, like, get you in. But once I've got you hook, line, and sinker, bam, sorry, clothes are back on. We're going to play.
You turn into a leather daddy.
Yeah, but this immediately sets up the kind of foundation of their adult relationship, which is that Daniel tells Luke what to say, and then it works out basically on his behalf. So it gets the desired outcome, and then that makes Luke more amenable to then listen to what Daniel has to say down the line. So in this case, it prevents his mother from further hurting herself, but it's at the risk of threatening his own bodily self. And that's something that Daniel will repeatedly do. He puts Luke into physical danger.
Well, that's where this toxic masculinity observation, though, will come into play, because it is constant throughout this film, from when they were kids in the beginning, but it really starts amping up right here.
You mentioned seduction. I do think that he is attempting different ways of trying to get Luke's attention, where it's like, I'm going to be here naked, or I'm going to be the cool and collected person that's helping you through this. I'm going to give you everything you need. Or in the next scene, when Luke is cleaning up, Daniel wants to play, and he's, saying like, you had such an imagination as a kid. Last time I saw you were bursting with it, and now you want to be a lawyer? Wasn't your father a lawyer? Like, the way that he is pelting Luke with every little way that he can try to get in and sort of find his in at this point.
Well, I want to be boring for like literally 20 seconds. In case people don't know what toxic masculinity is, because I do think it's a term that's thrown around a lot, and it you may not know what it is when you're saying it, but it really applies here, because basically what toxic masculinity is, it's a way to refer to certain cultural norms that are associated with harm to society and men themselves. I actually think it's the part that's left out a lot. People think it's, toxic masculinity is like bad for like other people, but like non-men, but it is really bad for men themselves. Traditional stereotypes of men as socially dominant, along with related traits such as misogyny and homophobia can be considered toxic due in part to the promotion of violence, including sexual assault and domestic violence. And what we have here in this scene is domestic violence, suicidal ideation, and we haven't reached sexual assault yet, but we're gonna get there very shortly.
Yeah. This film has a very complicated relationship with sexualized violence in particular, because in some ways it's negotiating areas of consent, but then it's also very clearly tiptoeing around that line. But yeah, we'll have a lot to talk about with the Sophie sex scene.
Well, and that's also where if you ever hear the boys will be boys, like, that's very much we're brushing off this really fucking shitty behavior with, it's just how men are.
So this is where Cassie re-enters the picture. It turns out that when she and Luke collided, he lost his wallet. So she's returning it as he's cleaning up, as you mentioned, Terry. And Daniel immediately takes notice of her. And he, once again, starts feeding Luke lines about what to say so that he can spend more time with her. But I love the way that Patrick Schwarzenegger plays this, because there's always something really lecherous about the way he looks at other people who come into Luke's life. It's almost like he wants to eat them, or he's looking at potential future victims, but he's always got some kind of nefarious gleam in his eye.
It's funny that you say that, because my one note about this scene was Daniel watches her like a shark. I wrote that down, and then insist. Because, that's what he tells him. He's like, you need to insist, and you need to tell her that you're an artist too. But the way he's watching her, you're absolutely right. It's kind of lecherous. It's definitely like a shark that is circling his prey.
Yeah.
I think a very simplistic reading of the way that Daniel manhandles Luke is that he wants to live vicariously through him, and that often means in physical sensations, right? He wants him to do cocaine. He wants him to fuck women. But I think you can play that out metaphorically quite a bit further.
So that's something that Mortimer actually hones in on a lot during his commentary, is how much Daniel envies Luke for being real, for being able to feel things. That's why we'll get the scene in a minute whenever Daniel is walking on the beach and the water's hitting his feet. And I think Luke even says, how does it feel? And Daniel doesn't know. I will confess, I didn't get a lot of that from this film. I didn't get a lot of, Daniel is mad because he's not a physical being, and that's why he keeps going from person to person to person to feel these things.
Okay.
But I thought it was interesting that Mortimer was so focused on that as Daniel's motivation. For me, I was like, Daniel's a demon. He just does this because he's like the imp or whatever. So I don't know. I never really thought of Daniel as, I don't want to say empathetic, but as having like a little sad goal of his own, I guess.
And I don't know if we want to talk about this now or later when we get to these in particular scenes, but he talks about the fact that he is giving art to a bunch of people throughout history, and they're taking credit for it, and how angry that makes him. And so there is this, I feel like at this point in his life, in his existence of centuries and centuries of being that kind of supernatural.
He's almost like a muse, right? But he doesn't get the credit for it?
He doesn't get any credit for it.
And to bring it all the way back to the beginning, that cloud that we see at the beginning is described by Mortimer himself as the formless cloud of creation and destruction. So we are led to believe now that Daniel has been in existence since the dawn of time, the dawn of creation.
Yeah?
I'll have more about that in a minute.
We'll get there. All right, so we're still really in the burgeoning situation with Luke and Cassie. So she ends up, inviting him to this art show, but she is, when he walks up, she's already getting into a near fight with another artist, and she's kind of being thrown out. Do you get the impression? So they go back to her place, which is this gorgeous loft. To be a struggling young artist in New York City, apparently.
Okay, she's saying all real artists are either dead or broke. You can't make art in this city anymore, and yet she is living in that gorgeous place.
Enormous New York apartment.
I'm sorry, I have seen A Perfect Murder, and this is Viggo Mortensen's art loft, and she is no Viggo Mortensen.
Also, fun fact, so apparently when making a film in the States, if you build a set, you get a tax credit for it. And a set is defined simply as 3 walls. So Cassie's
Oh my
art
gosh.
installation, her exhibit, is a set that was written off for tax credits.
Like her little thing with the toilet and the cat?
Yeah.
The cat box art. I love that.
That is amazing. And also very creative. Aspiring filmmakers, take note.
There you go.
So, yeah, I do love these early scenes because you almost forget that this is a horror movie or that there's this nefarious demon lurking around Luke, because we just get to see this montage of them destroying her art, talking about her art, and it has a sense of play and fun that you get the impression Luke has not experienced in a very, very long time.
Right. It's invigorating.
Absolutely. But we also get a little bit of exposition about Daniel in this scene, because he mentions, and it's a throwaway line, but on rewatch, when you start to learn what we're going to talk about later, where Daniel says William Blake said his poetry was a dictation from an archangel, but really he was just gifted, just like you. Like, first of all, this is manipulation. This is him feeding into the ego of Luke. But it's also, I will say, I think that in this movie and in this universe, Daniel is the voice that gave the art to William Blake.
Right.
He did Hieronymus Bosch. He did the Bible. I think all of this stuff is coming from him.
Mm-hmm. And there's a real insinuation of like angels and demons here, because folks, we talked a little bit about William Blake when we talked about Saint Maud on the Patreon earlier this year. I also always think of the William Blake Red Dragon arc.
I was saying, he's Red Dragon, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Even the word gifted to me is like he bestows this gift upon saints and religious deities. So in a way, it not only strokes Luke's ego, but it raises him up to the point that, oh, he is going to be martyred for this, because that's what happens to saints.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of being gifted, the audience is then gifted with the beautiful torso of one Patrick Schwarzenegger when he takes off his shirt so that Luke can cheat off of all of the equations on his body during a test.
This whole sequence, so it's like, oh, look at him, they're being clever, whatever, but it's also like, it is so sexual because the way that they're both smiling at each other, and Daniel is just like rubbing all over his body, like, oh, the answer's here, Mr.
It's
Luke.
on my shoulder, it's on my pec.
And then he waggles his eyebrows like coquettishly, like
It's so sexy.
It's fuck eyes for days, yes. Oh my god. If cheating was only this sexy, I would have cheated a lot more in college.
I mean, and, it's cheating in two ways. I mean, he's not dating Cassie yet, but, he's already, whatever relationship has started between them, he's already emotionally cheating on her with Daniel.
Right. I'm laughing, but it's 100% true.
It is true. I will just say this right now. I have not seen Sasha Lane in American Honey, which is the reason she got this role, and I've heard she's amazing in that film. This character of Cassie is such a non-entity to me because she is just like, it's almost like in a rom-com when you have the other woman, but it's like, okay, well, that she's not really important in the long run,
Yeah. Yeah, she's the wrong partner. She's the one that Luke should not end up with because he has much better chemistry with Daniel, even though, they're kind of fire and water and they shouldn't be together. But, oh my god, I was going to say, it reminds me of Gossip Girl when fucking Blair and Chuck got together. Yeah. I'm going to cut that part out because that was stupid. I don't know the
names. Although I've seen your thing saying the new one's bad.
Oh, it's definitely not good. Yeah, Sasha Lane is interesting in this. Like, I actually find her quite personable, but you're right that Cassie almost feels underwritten so that you just think of her as, oh, she is the right partner. She's the good girl that
but she's boring.
Luke should be after.
And this is no fault of Lane. I am not impressed with Lane in this movie, but it's not really through any fault of her own. It's just that this role is honestly kind of a nothing role for me. It's the white bread to Daniel's anything else.
Well said.
I mean, we're about to get to a bunch of cocaine, so we can say cocaine, but...
Sort of, yeah. So Luke is definitely coming out of his shell. We get a bit of a montage where he and Daniel are having lots of fun. So he's pranking his roommate Richard, played by Andrew Bridges. He's developing his photography skills. He's hitting on psychology student Sophie, who is played by Hannah Marks. And I feel like this is a little on the nose, but it's still playful, where Daniel encourages Luke to refer to her as Louise Brooks in her famous role Pandora's Box, which is like, oh gee, is that what the dollhouse is meant to represent? It's the box you shouldn't open, and once you do, you can't put the genie back in?
I do think a lot of this is not surface level, but it is a little on the nose. But we've used that as critiques before, Joe, and I'm sure you have too, Terry. But
I think it's using a lot of visual language and a lot of things that we have experienced in film, because obviously you mentioned the kind of prank of Richard, his roommate,
right.
But like the scene where Daniel is hanging upside down in front of his face just immediately brought to mind Drop Dead Fred.
Yeah.
The imaginary friend movie from like the late 80s, early 90s.
Yep.
So there's that aspect of it. There's the kind of Fight Club-esque comparison between the two of them.
Yeah.
There's visual language here, and there are plot points that I think he is using as kind of shorthand in order to not tie down the plot, because this movie is paced incredibly well, I think. And I think that if we had spent more time trying to dig a little bit deeper into things, it probably would slow down the actual feel of this film. So I do think he's relying on visual language and motifs that we are familiar with.
It's like a shorthand. So it's like, here, I'm giving you what you need so that we can just move on, because I know that you'll be able to pick it up.
That's so fascinating, because I saw a Letterboxd review from someone that was like, "Ugh, it was really boring until the twist halfway through, and then it was better." And I was like, "The twist halfway through?" I think what this person was talking about was the reveal later that Daniel was also the imaginary friend of the person who died by suicide in the beginning. I was like, well, that's like an hour into this 90-minute movie, but yeah, sure, I guess you can say that if you want to.
I definitely would not call that a twist, but okay.
I don't think so either. Maybe they just needed more excitement. I don't know. I mean, whatever.
Maybe.
They're wrong.
Yeah. Okay, so particularly in this scene, we see Daniel looking at Luke and Sophie in the same way that he looks at Cassie, where he wants to make a physical connection happen because he wants to be involved in that. And it's very important that this is also when Luke gets exceedingly drunk at this party. And we see for the first time that Daniel is able to physically manipulate him, and he actually makes Luke self-harm.
Yeah, what I loved about this sequence in particular is, I mean, this is the moment that Daniel is smiling when he is egging Luke on to chug, and he gets really drunk, and then he's vomiting, and he's like, I fucked up, and he's like, no, you did great. And he has this smile of like, look at my art, look what I have created, look what I have made you do that no one else could make you do. And so it's also this idea that Luke is coming around to him, but also we get that exposition of being able to actually control him, as you said, with the straight edge. And it's also a moment between this and when Daniel is in the classroom and he's, helping him cheat, that we see that he can do things to himself and he can do things to Luke, but he can't do anything to the other outside world. He has to use Luke in order to do stuff.
I'm interested. Do you think that he can control Luke before this point? Because I always read it as he needs to make Luke malleable. So he needs to get him drunk or high or when he's sleeping. So it's like he can't be using his higher functions in order for Daniel to take control.
No, you're right. What I mean in terms of controlling him is that he is making him do things.
Right. Yeah. Suggestion and advice.
Suggestion,
sort of
right? Like, I want you to do this, and he's going to go do it. And so even without embodying him, he is making him do stuff.
Right. Yes, absolutely. So we then come back to Cassie. We have a bit of a fun break and enter bookstore date, which I'm not going to lie, I was like, oh, that sounds like super fun. Just getting to go into a bookstore.
Yes, of course y'all would.
Getting to go in and just peruse books when nobody else is there and like reading passages. I don't know. It was fun, but it also starts to hint at the darker side.
But then they go and grab where the wild things are. Like, okay, movie.
Again, yes. It's funny, right? Because these things are the really explicit things, and they're the ones that we're kind of groaning at. But I think you're right, Terry. It's the visual stuff. It's landing far more successfully because you could miss it. It's not quite as obvious.
Well, because we haven't really talked about Daniel as Luke's, like, darker... I mean, okay, obviously he is his darker half, but he's not actually, like, Luke, right? Do y'all maybe think that Daniel is representative of Luke's actual id?
I think you could definitely read it that way.
Yeah.
Or it's like the id that Luke has repressed, which Daniel is able to say, no, you need to let this out. You need to be more like me.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a conversation killer. Sorry, guys.
I said the smart thing. That was it for me.
And I'm done.
I used the word id in a sentence.
There we go. So this is all going fine, and then we end up getting this sequence where Cassie says that she wants to paint Luke, and all of a sudden we get the sense that Daniel doesn't like being ignored, but he also doesn't like it when he's not the center of attention.
I will not be ignored, Dan. Isn't that his name in Fatal Attraction?
It might be.
I think it is. But yeah, no, yeah, she paints a picture of him, and Daniel's true form is reflected in a shadow in this painting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that, of course, becomes a plot point later on. But also, we need to note that this finally gets Luke a little bit of nookie, so we get a sex scene here.
Okay, so I don't want to keep going back, but the scene before she paints him, where they're in the bookstore,
Mm-hmm.
and Daniel starts quoting the Bible and quoting Exodus 20.
Getting really angry.
He is quoting it as if he wrote it, and this is where I
Yes.
was starting to think about the fact that, you know, the Bible, this is implying that he wrote this, that he was the muse of whoever wrote the Bible, because he is quoting it by memory. And he also is getting very angry because it's all about how, you know, there is only one God. And to Luke, Daniel wants to be that one God. And so the fact that Luke is making a joke out of it, both is insulting his work, that he wrote this, and B is also, you know, disproving the fact that Daniel is his God. And so this scene following into "we deserve to be immortalized," and Luke saying, "You think I deserve to be immortalized?" is this kind of, this is the turning point where Daniel is like, no, fuck this. I am tired of being the muse that is constantly being ignored.
Right. It's my turn to shine.
And see, the film presents Daniel as almost like a godlike figure, right? Even in his true form, this horrific-looking monster. I actually always view him, especially because we're talking about toxic masculinity, I view him as something as like a court jester who is trying to be a god but is not. Like there's a Clive Barker story called The Yattering and Jack, where this like little thing keeps like fucking with this guy's life, and that's how I view Daniel. Like, he's not this head demon in the hierarchy of wherever the fuck he's from. He is low level, and that's contributing to why he's so much of an asshole.
That's so interesting, because I read him as a king in his own court, which is why he has the kind of crown, but then he can't make that a reality in our world, and that's why he's so pissed off. It's like he has all the power and the privilege, but he can't make it translate over.
See, I do view him as a king in his own court, but a court that he built that no one else is a part of.
Well, doesn't this also kind of tie into the idea of toxic masculinity?
Well, you know, 100%. And that's why, I mean, again, like, obviously anyone can be toxically masculine.
Well, I think mostly men.
I want to point out, with the scene that we're all talking about, though, when they're kind of on their date right before this where the Wild Things part is, there's a scene where where Cassie and Luke are like in a school bus, kind of walking around.
Right.
There was an entire scene that basically they could not film. It was supposed to be where Cassie and Luke stole a tugboat together. They go off into the ocean. Daniel gets hit in the face by a beam of some sort, and it takes the top half of his head off, and his brain is exposed. Whoa. And you kind of get to know a little bit more about Daniel. But basically, when they were going to film this, it was thunderstorming, and there's a rule. They didn't have the insurance for it. But like, there's a rule where it's like, you cannot shoot on the water on a boat within 30 minutes of lightning striking.
Yeah.
And the lightning kept striking. So they basically had to scrap this entire day of 3 pages of shooting for a scene that Mortimer really, really wanted in this movie. And they had to substitute it with a 5-second shot of them playing in a bus.
That is so funny, because you describing it sounds like a very interesting scene, but I also feel like that would have really hindered the pacing.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. And it might be something where it's like, oh, maybe in practice, like seeing it happen,
right,
it would hit differently. But yeah, hearing it, I'm like, well, that just seems like a lot of a detour for this movie to take.
Yeah. I think we get just enough information about who or what Daniel is. Like, I love that we're able to speculate and have these multiple readings. I don't know that I want to learn too much more about who or what he is or where he comes from. Like, to me, the power of the film is in that unknowing.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Yes.
I also do think the 5-second scene kind of ties a little bit into one of the things I noticed on this watch is when we're first introduced to Cassie, she almost has like little pigtails. She has like this overgrown coat. She's skateboarding. She's very kid-like.
Yeah.
And so the fact that, you know, she's talking about where the wild things are, and we're talking about a kid that's misbehaving, and the fact that they're playing around school buses, it gives their relationship a very kind of childlike wonder and whimsy to it that is being upset by this authoritarian figure.
Well, it's also evocative of the relationship that Luke and Daniel used to have and no longer do, right? It's what Daniel's trying to get Luke back to, and here it's just coming effortlessly with this fucking girl.
Yep.
Well, and moving forward then to the nookie that you were describing, Joe. So Mortimer's pretty upfront about, like, yeah, I totally use this as influence. I ripped this off. He even says, I ripped off The Exorcist in the scene. Where
Okay.
He's like, oh yeah, the iconic Exorcist shot. Yeah, we totally copied that for whenever Dr. Braun comes in later for the deep throating scene.
Right.
And he's like, oh yeah, and people are always like, oh, it's Cronenberg. Like, you're taking from a lot of Cronenberg because of the body horror when the faces merge together. And he's like, well, I mean, there is Cronenberg influences, but the biggest Cronenberg influence for me is with the sex scene. And it's not from a film you would expect. It's from a history of violence.
Yeah.
Yes. And he's like, there are two sex scenes in that movie between the same characters, and one is very loving and innocent, and the other is not.
Yeah.
Oh.
And that is 100% what he was trying to mirror in his sex scene with Cassie here, and his... I'm gonna say sex scene, but some may qualify it as
Rape.
assault and rape of some sort with Sophie later.
Yeah. Interesting. I can see it, definitely. And folks, if you have not seen A History of Violence, A+ recommendation.
It's so good.
Need to watch it.
I was going to say, Terry, that was for you. We literally just talked about it on Tuesday.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay, so after this fucking scene, we actually get a very important transition. So there's a repeated glimpse of the maelstrom and then calls for help from the dollhouse. So there's an insinuation that there's somebody else in there. And then we transition back to then Sophie and her friend arriving to do coke with Luke and his roommate.
Yeah. This is a happening dorm room right here.
It is, and we also get Daniel, because Daniel obviously hates Richard, and he points to, again, that I mentioned earlier, the kind of triptych of the Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch. He points to that picture there, and he's like, he kind of reminds me of these guys, and he's pointing to the triptych part that is of hell. So like there is this image here that is eventually repeated later of like, this is that art, this is what we're moving into at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we are literally about to go subterranean. We're about to go into
red-lit steam tunnels.
Yeah. I also feel like we should note, not that Trace will be able to contribute anything to this, but because it's about costuming.
Okay.
So Daniel is dressed in the most ridiculously ostentatious outfit. It looks like he's wearing plum, almost like silk pants, and then he's got a see-through leopard button-up, and then some kind of jacket. But it's the most outfit I think I have seen a male character wear in a very long time.
And then he follows it up later with an almost like geisha type kind of gown later on that he's wearing. His costume is it's perfect in this movie. It's like, it's weird because he is this hyper masculine character, but then he also has this flair of androgyny to him.
Mm-hmm. I like to think that that's a reflection of who Luke is. So he's mirroring the clothes based on the particular moment. So in this case, he's looking to be almost like a fashion supermodel because he's planning his seduction where he is finally going to get to fuck someone. And then later, he's wearing the kind of like geisha kimono relaxation when he goes to the fucking institute. That's when they visit Claire, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, so down we go, into the tunnels. This is where Luke resists Daniel's influence and he gets really annoyed. So he says, well, why don't you just let me take over? And this is an interesting piece considering, if you want to read it, a rape scene that we're about to get with Sophie. This is Daniel asking Luke for consent to take over his body, and Luke gives it to him.
Which kind of mirrors the sex scene from earlier. We did gloss over this, actually, but I love it. Luke does ask Cassie for consent when they're having sex.
Which I loved. I love it in a movie when a man asks for consent. It's so hot.
And Mortimer talks about this in the commentary. He's like, yeah, we wanted to have this, but people were like, how do you make that not awkward? And he was like, well, we just do it. Like, we just have Daniel say, is this okay? And Cassie says yes or no. And of course, in this case, she says yes.
It was so hot.
Yes. It contrasted with the scene we're about to get.
Right.
which is coke fuel, which also I'm just kind of like, dude, you've been doing so much cocaine tonight. Your dick is not getting hard. But maybe with the power of Daniel, like, maybe it is. I don't know.
Wait, are you saying that the power of Daniel compels your dick? The power of Daniel.
I mean, look, coke may make you, I mean, as someone who has not had any experience with cocaine, it may make you horny, but it is not making you hard.
It's not that kind of stimulant. Got it.
The power of Daniel.
Well, maybe you just need to have a face wormy assimilation makeout session with your imaginary friend before you do it.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing too, right? So we're saying there's 2 sex scenes. This swap of Luke and Daniel is essentially a sex scene in and of itself.
Oh, yeah.
And it is, yeah. It's great in the sense of, like, visually it is stunning. But it's also, I mean, well, we can't even call this a rape because because Luke does let Daniel in.
Yeah. And also, this is very clearly a homage to Hellraiser Bloodline, right? Am I right, folks? You know, Trace, this would help if you actually laughed at the jokes. Like,
I was like, wait, what happened to Hellraiser Bloodline? No, yeah. No, the guy becomes 2 Cenobites. He merges with another Cenobite. It totally makes sense.
Oh, okay. I've not seen it.
Terry, you disappoint. God. That was my fucking birthday pick, Terry.
Yeah, that was a birthday.
You know what, Terry? Get off the podcast. You're dead to me.
Oh.
Okay. So Daniel has taken over Luke's body. At this point, he is now in control. This rightfully freaks out Luke. And when he tries to regain control, he almost loses his hand. It's like he slices through it, and it's just attached by, like, I mean, a bit of a limp wrist, if you know what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. And yeah, then we get Daniel as Luke, very vigorously having sex with Sophie. I mean, she's not protesting, but he's so aggressive that it's hard not to read it as an assault.
No, that's the thing. I mean, technically, quote unquote, it's not a rape because she does say yes, she gives her consent, but the manner, it's one of the things. I don't know if she consented to the method of penetration here. It's just him pumping away, standing up, shirt on, butt showing from underneath the shirt. Very cute butt. But it is so uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah.
And even when they're done, like, she doesn't give an inkling that it's like, oh, she's not okay with this until he harms the roommate.
Yeah. Yeah, he actually pushes his face up against a hot pipe or the hot wall, and you're just like, oh, wow, so we've got 2 different forms of assault back to back, and then, you know, she hits him with the chair.
Also, we should point out the line of dialogue that Daniel gives when he's trying to get into Luke, which is, it's not cheating if it's with me. That's like a closeted married gay man who's married to a woman, and he's fooling around with his male lover, and so, oh, it's not cheating because we're both straight.
Yeah, it's just on the DL.
Yes, 100%. It's not cheating. It's another person, but it's not cheating.
I don't know. It seems like a bit of a reach, guys. Come on. Okay, so this is where Luke has definitely had enough. He no longer wants Daniel around, and he says, I'm going to close my eyes, I'm going to count to 3, and you're going to disappear. And this is really where Patrick Schwarzenegger turns up the kind of, haha, fuck you, I'm not going anywhere kind of charm. It's really great. It's very uncomfortable. Daniel refuses to go back into the dollhouse even when Luke demands it. And I got really uncomfortable considering the dialogue that we're having around mental health in this movie, where Daniel says that Luke is too crazy for him to go back.
Yeah, at this point, I think Daniel is taunting him, trying to get him to kill himself.
Oh. Okay.
Because at this point, when Luke is saying 1, 2, 3, and he opens his eyes, and Daniel is like right in front of him, he says, "You might as well cut your own head off." Like, he is using very violent language to put into Luke's mind about, like, there's only one way you're going to get rid of me.
Do you think that's because whenever Daniel, I mean, again, this is just me speculating here, but, like, because whenever Daniel latches onto someone, he is stuck with them until they die, and he's like, I am done with you, I have used your resources, time to move on to someone else.
Well, I was kind of wondering about this because the opening scene of the movie is, of course, the very violent murder right, that happens at the diner that we, later on learn is Daniel's work. And I kind of wonder if Daniel is at this point just bored with everything, where he is basically just fucking around with people until they kill things, and that is what he is saying is art now. Because
Right.
as we'll see later, he has like his little own exhibit, and the exhibit is the gun that the guy used, and it is this piece of art. It is Hieronymus Bosch's piece of art up on the wall. So I think at this point in his life, he is just like, I'm tired of people using me for being amused. I'm just gonna fuck with everybody, and that's how I interpreted it this time.
All right, I will subscribe to that with you.
Yeah, because I've always wondered what Daniel's end goal is, because I think on the first watch, I definitely just thought, oh, he just wants to get inside of Luke so that he can be corporeal and experience all of these things.
Yeah.
But the more you start to think about it, he's very much an agent of chaos, right? Like, he wants to spin anarchy.
I was gonna say that, but I was afraid it was too jokery.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of is, right? Like, because he's a jokester in a lot of the ways that he goes about this. He's Machiavellian, but he's also like, I want to play pranks.
Well, coincidentally enough, whenever we get Luke's makeover at the end, whenever Daniel fully takes him over, they intentionally put him in a red suit because they were going to do purple, and they were like, "Oh, purple is too jokery." but this comes out December of 2019, and so by the time, and this is like after the festival premiere, by that time, Joker had come out, and Joaquin Phoenix was all in red outfits, and Mortimer was like, "Are you fucking kidding me?"
Guys, I swear I've had this lookbook for years. Okay, so this is where Luke checks back in with his mother, Claire. She is at an institution where she's been since she tried to harm herself, and we get a bit of background about her struggles with mental health. So she had them at age 20, which we're meant to believe is right around the age that Luke is at. And she can sense that something is wrong with him, but he can't confide in her because Daniel is just fucking yammering in his ear.
Yep.
It's really, really sad because Claire knows something is wrong, but she comes off looking like she's having some kind of episode, so she just gets dragged away.
And she's out of the movie at this point. And this is like, I mean, I don't know where else we could put this character in this movie, but I wanted to spend more time with this character because in the film, she is the only one that... I mean, she doesn't know what Daniel's going through, but she is the one that is most likely to relate to him.
Right. Yeah. Because we've already seen her being sympathetic to him.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think she also sees that there's something else other than mental issues plaguing him, because she talks about, like, you're trapped, you're in trouble, there's something going on here. And I think she sees that there is something that has attached itself to Daniel. But the irony, of course, is that the more she tries to talk about it, the more people are going to use the gender term again about hysterical, because the doctors are pulling her away, saying, you know, like, oh, it's obviously they're going to go up her medication at this point because they think that she is acting out again. And it goes back to that opening line of with the therapist in the beginning where, you know, he's like saying, I don't want to faint like a Victorian Duchess. It's this idea of that women are going to be hysterical. And here we have, again, a woman that is trying to stop and trying to help her son. And she's being deemed as like mentally unfit.
Well, it's fascinating that you say that, Terry, because upon reflection, I realized that every woman in this film actually notices that there is something that's attached or that there's a darker side to Luke. So Cassie notices it, Sophie comments on it, and then Claire also notices it here, and yet none of the men in the movie see it. So it's like women who are often accused of being hysterical are also the ones who are most adept at spotting it in other people, even if it happens to be Luke.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, so yes, we do have a repeat visit with Dr. Braun, and this is where Luke worries that he is schizophrenic. We get a bit of a diagnosis. This is intercut with a confrontation with Sophie on campus. So he's been removed from campus. He's not allowed to be there. And I always forget about the scene where Daniel cuts up Sophie and the blood sprays all over Luke's face.
Yeah, I mean it's a fantasy, but it's still like, oh, like when it happens, you're just like, oh my shit.
Well, it's an escalation of what Daniel is capable of. He previously hasn't been able to give Luke visions of anything, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's testament that his control over Luke is becoming stronger and stronger and stronger.
Yes.
Luke's defenses are weakening.
Yeah, because we're also getting pictures that Luke has apparently sent to Cassie, but they're taken while he's sleeping. And then, of course, there's the foreshadowy moment where we see Daniel is actually prying open Luke's mouth and trying to kind of gently climb inside at the bookstore before Luke wakes up.
Not loose enough yet, needs some more poppers.
Exactly. If you can't get the whole fist in there, then you need to keep working at it.
Yep. Loosen it up, baby.
Oh, God. All right, so Luke begins taking medication for schizophrenia against Daniel's wishes, but the pills don't seem to be doing anything, at least not in the area of controlling Daniel.
Could y'all imagine a version of this film, and I imagine in like the late 90s, early 2000s it might have been like this, but where it actually is, quote-unquote, just schizophrenia?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that would have played a lot worse.
Oh, fuck yeah. I actually think that there's a number of people who don't like this movie because they feel like it's even treading in that direction, even though I would argue it's not. Like, it's not going full hog there.
Yeah,
but I think for some people, it's still too much. Like, they don't like the conflation of demons and mental illness.
And I disagree with that reading, but yeah, I mean, again, like, it's not wrong. Like, if that's what you think, that is it.
It's difficult because watching this, I can absolutely see some complaints about that aspect of it, and people wouldn't be wrong in that regard, I don't think. But I do think Adam is pulling from a history of the connection, and whether it's true or not, because I went and did some research and I can't find anything in psychology that is either refuting it or saying that it is true. But this idea that we have seen throughout history of entertainment of mental illness or madness and genius. And we have this aspect because he specifically brings up William Blake. And William Blake, people thought he was a madman back in the day because he would say that he got all of his stuff from this archangel. And that's something that is brought up in this movie. So we have this idea of the madness mixed with genius. And that seems to be the sort of fold or lens that Adam is using to explore these two characters.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting, too, because we get the sense that if left alone, Luke could actually be quite a great photographer. It's something that Daniel awakens in him when he encourages him to not be a lawyer and to go and explore something more creative, initially under the guise of impressing Cassie. But we see the photos that Luke takes later, and it is clear that he has a gift. So there's a gentle insinuation that Luke could be a talented, maybe not prodigy, but that he does have great art within him.
Yeah.
So this is when Luke goes to visit Percy Thigpen, who is played by Peter McRobbie, and he is the father of the shooter from the coffee house at the opening. And
what a last name.
That is a name.
Thigpen. So John was the shooter, and it turns out, of course, when we start to dig into his documents and the things that he had as a child, oh, look, there's drawings of an imaginary friend named Daniel.
Bum, bum, bum.
Mm-hmm.
Twist.
Oh my god, a twist. I love the twist.
Halfway through the movie. Actually, 2/3 of the way, but yes.
But I do think that this is really where the film takes on more of those cosmic appreciations. Like, you could argue that it's a bit of a simple story about a boy struggling with his own personal demons, whether you want to call it mental illness or whether you want to call it literal up until this point. And then here it really takes on... I mean, Terry, I think you've done a great job of unpacking the agelessness of Daniel and how that reverberates through history. But up until this point, we could say, oh, those are just readings. But here we get confirmation, oh yeah, this thing is a fucking body hopper through the ages.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it kind of elevates the story up into a whole new level.
Well, that's the thing. This isn't really a twist for me. It's just a reveal.
Mm-hmm.
It deepens the mythology and it deepens the story we're seeing. It doesn't, like, have an incredible impact on what I've been seeing. Like, it doesn't
change, it just enriches.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So this is where Luke then tries to confide in Cassie because he's not only worried about her, but I think he's looking for some kind of outlet. Like, he feels like he is going mad and he wants to confide in somebody. The problem is that he keeps saying things like, he's going to kill you. And when you're saying that to a girl, it's just hard to not have her be scared of you.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, so now we get the moment that people often focus on when they talk about this movie. So Dr. Braun shows up at the house and he says he's going to hypnotize Luke and have a conversation with this Daniel. And then we get the scene. The scene that you talked about off the top there, Trace.
I mean, this is the deep throating scene. I almost view it as a New Nightmare homage, kind of, when Freddy's trying to eat Heather Langenkamp's son. I mean, to describe to y'all what this was like to watch in a sold-out South by Southwest theater as this scene was unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god. I mean, it's horrifying, it's gross, it looks great.
It looks so fucking good.
It's so good.
Yeah. And what they had was they had a couch with a hole in it that they had the effect of Miles Robbins' elongated mouth that they would just have Schwarzenegger climb into. And I was like, oh my god. Like, you say it, it's like, oh yeah, it's easy as pie. And it's like, oh my god.
I'm just imagining the prop master having to come in with this giant, like, sofa-size version of Miles Robbins' mouth. Like, can I take that home at the end of the shoot?
And if we're talking about, queer theory or queer readings on this, so yeah, they merge faces earlier, so they're swapping head. But in this one, it is full-on penetration. Like, we are having a non-consensual sex scene. This is a rape.
Yes.
Between Daniel and Luke. And it is haunting, it's upsetting, it's so gross, but it's so pretty. Oh, maybe that's a wrong choice of words to use.
No, I think there's beauty to be found in disgusting, visceral imagery.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I also think it's interesting that you brought up A New Nightmare, because I was immediately at this scene thinking about Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge, where Freddy's like, you're the body, I am the brain. And this is literally the dynamic between the two, where Daniel thinks of himself as that muse, that intelligence, that art, that power, that creativity, and he just sees Luke as the sort of physical manifestation that he can operate through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and, there's an oft-repeated line of dialogue in this movie, which is that they keep commanding each other to get into the dollhouse. But really, it does remind me of that line that Jesse says in Nightmare on Elm Street 2, where it's like, he wants to get back inside me or whatever.
Oh, he's inside me and he wants to take me again.
Exactly. There we go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also think it's really uncomfortable. He doesn't say it to Luke, but Daniel definitely tells Dr. Braun, this is going to be really painful for you.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, ugh, the connotations.
I was genuinely bummed, if not surprised, that
Sorry.
we lose Braun so early. Early, it's late in the film, but it's like, oh, you're showing up just to die.
I mean, I don't love the fact that we have two people of color in this movie. There's Sacha Lane and then there's this actor. I don't love that he shows up just to get murdered because, as we've talked about numerous times, there's a really bad trope with that. But in this case, I do kind of love that it's a figure of authority who didn't believe Luke when he told him, hey, I've got this problem. He was like, I'm sure it's fine. Don't worry.
But when he shows up, though, he does believe him, right?
I feel like he doesn't believe that something is actually happening. I think that he believes Luke is having a fit. And then he sees Daniel. Daniel somehow reveals himself because Luke is asleep, presumably.
Well, the doctor says that he wants to bring them both into hypnosis. So I think there's like that kind of connective tissue, like they're both sharing a hypnosis together, and that's why he can see him.
Maybe it's a thing like with the mom in the beginning where it's like, okay, she doesn't really believe in Daniel, but she's working on Luke's level to be like, okay, well, he believes in Daniel, so I'm going to do this to make it so it works for him.
Right. And then under hypnosis, he's actually then able to see what he hasn't been able to see before.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting, too. This is the only scene in the film where Daniel is clearly talking to Luke, but we as an audience are in Dr. Braun's position, so we don't see him because we just have Luke saying, oh, he's saying some truly nasty stuff right now.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Yeah. Also, to bring it back to the costuming, this is the first time I also noticed that Daniel is wearing a necklace that has that sort of crowny thing that Cassie was drawing, and that eventually is his head. He has a necklace that is literally that.
Oh my god, he's wearing his own jewelry line.
He is.
Gross. Sick.
What a good brand.
Oh my god, guys, it's like de jewelry. That's for all 5 of you who got that one.
I will say that if we're talking about the makeup effects of Daniel's true form, the makeup effects and creature design were actually done by Martin Assels. And Joe, you'll be impressed to know that he got his start working on Event Horizon.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say a Hellraiser movie, but I'll take it. Yay, Event Horizon, yay.
But he would go on to do makeup effects for films like Bride and Seed of Chucky, House of a Thousand Corpses, previous episode I Know Who Killed Me, and the upcoming reboot of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, that is a good filmography.
Here you go, Joe. He was a technician on Hellraiser 3.
Yeah!
Ba-bam!
There you go.
I feel like there are so many makeup and effects artists who are tied to the Hellraiser franchise. It just always kind of boggles my mind.
I mean, if you're a makeup effects artist and you're not working in the horror genre, what are you doing?
You're doing Glenn Close's prosthetics for that hillbilly elegy bullshit.
No one remembers what that movie is, Joe.
She was nominated for a Golden Globe.
Ah!
Or she won, maybe. Oh, anyway. Okay, so this is where we get the fantastic makeover scene, which again is like, okay, so we are coding Luke as like the de facto lead of our rom-com. Like, give him a makeover, give him a red suit, slick back that hair.
All he needed was to get another man inside of him, and all of a sudden he's a fashionista.
Exactly. She's letting her freak flag fly. I do love the way that Miles Robbins smokes in this scene.
Oh my god, the smoking and biting.
Uh-huh.
He changes his entire body language once he's Daniel, and it's a really, really impressive performance from Robbins.
The mimicry of Patrick Schwarzenegger's body language and movements from earlier in the film, like, they don't look that similar. Like, they kind of look the same, but not that much. And then when you see Miles Robbins transform into this, it's eerily similar.
Yeah.
I couldn't stress it more. That's what I'm trying to do right now.
Try. Can you try to stress it more?
I cannot stress it enough. Okay, so at this point, this is basically where Luke gets locked in the dollhouse, and I do love the visual aesthetic of it. Initially, I compared it to a kind of prison, but then it's very clearly like a castle, and I think, again, the evocation of knights that we'll see that bookend the beginning and the end feels very on par. Like, Daniel thinks that he is a knight or a king, and he's got the fortress or the castle to go along with it.
Yeah, and he has a monster that's running around in it, sort of like the movie Castle Freak from the 90s.
Oh.
There's a lot here. I think that the way that he sees himself with the kind of elongated skull of being like a crown, absolutely. I think the castle, absolutely. The fact that he has it's perched over the edge of this abyss, I think is so interesting.
He's also wearing a costume, right? Like, he's essentially a drag king in this sense because he's got the crown, but that's his true form. He wears makeup to blend in.
He wears a human face, which he can rearrange like putty.
Oof.
The house of Daniel is what this damn dollhouse is.
Oh my god. So you two will probably think I'm a huge dum-dum, but I didn't realize until this rewatch that this monster that is running around the castle is John Thigpen. The first time I just thought, oh, he's got something in this castle.
Joe, I didn't know that. But that makes sense. So what you're saying is that what Daniel does once he's disposed of someone, they become like him in his little mansion?
Well, you could believe that he's got their soul or their true identity living inside whatever this castle is, even if the physical body dies, which is what we saw the coffee house shooter at the beginning. Which is terrifying, because that means, like, you will slowly morph to become more like Daniel, even after your physical body has died.
I also think, going back to the reading from the Bible, I think he sees himself as a god, and what does the idea of the Christian God do? He creates man in his own image, so he has literally created Thigpen into a mimicry of himself.
Yeah. But like a bastardization of it.
Yeah, and again, against his consent. Right?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
This is like a pathetic creature.
Oh, it's so sad.
It's not effective at chasing.
Well, and he's rushing after me and he's shouting, wait. And it almost seems horrifying, but then it's like, it's so incredibly sad. He's like, oh my God, there's someone else here for me.
Finally.
Oh, it's horrifying.
Yeah. And now I want to rewatch because I never put that together. I thought it was just like some minion.
Okay, so, well, Luke is exploring his new prison. We've got Daniel, who is wearing his visage, and he goes, of course, to see Cassie. And again, this to me is just the height of pettiness. It's like, dude, you've got your corporeal form. You could literally go anywhere. No one's keeping track of you. And yet, what do? You go to the girlfriend's place.
That's the toxic masculinity, though, right? Like, I got to show you that she likes me more than you, bro.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm better at being you than you are. I can go and have my way with your girl.
So we're into the climax, right? We're in the end of this movie. And, like, if we apply, like, a strict queer reading, let's say we want to say, okay, cool. Luke is a repressed homosexual. Daniel is his burgeoning sexuality coming out and, like, it's able to accept his true form.
Mm-hmm.
That reading, for me, doesn't really work. Because if you read it like that, then it's queerness is bad. It's the villain. It makes you do bad things. So I think there's a delicate way of reading homoeroticism in this film without flat out saying, like, Daniel represents that.
Yeah, I've never read this as... I've read this
Well, sorry. So I jumped the gun because I'm leading this into Luke's pseudo-suicide of sorts that we're about to get to.
Yeah.
When we talked with Adam, and I did bring up the kind of queer aspect that we're all kind of talking about, and he said that his intent was that he had seen a lot of movies about, like, Stand By Me, about young boys dealing with each other, or you saw buddy cop movies, older generation, but he didn't see a whole lot of men dealing with other men at this particular age. And he said at this point, and he talks about the toxic masculinity, but it's this idea of you see this really cool guy and you don't know, do I want to be him? Do I want to fuck him? I mean, Daniel is a very sure of himself character and Luke is not. So you have the sort of situation that you guys talked about back with Better Watch Out, where you have the evil character and the kind of subordinate that is, like, following along because he's maybe attracted to him. Maybe he thinks he's cooler than he actually is.
Right.
So we have this other situation here. And I think at this moment, at this climax moment between Cassie and him, he shows his face where he says, I've been kind to you, I've shown you sensitivity, fuck this whole charade. And that's when he changes his face and he is embracing that toxicity. He is embracing that character that is either pulling Luke but also kind of pushing him along. He is showing his cards.
Yeah. This is where the mask comes off and he reveals who he truly is. And, oh, okay, this is what I wear when I'm being myself. I'm a piece of shit now.
Yeah.
That was my eloquent summation of your very, crass, very crude. It's funny. My notes basically go down to like 2 lines at this point because it's like a rooftop fight scene. I do like the imagery when Cassie is banging Daniel's head against the wall and it's loosening bricks in the prison fortress.
Oh, yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of The Neverending Story and that kind of like...
No, I can see that. I can also even see it like something like The Further from Insidious.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, just another world. I mean, I'm going into the whole, this is his mind. He's escaping his mind. He's pulling himself out of the depths, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
He has to willfully jump off a ledge into a pink-purple abyss to escape this. He's jumping into
I do love that imagery.
The gay cloud.
Gay cloud.
Jump into that gay cloud, kids.
But before he does jump into the gay cloud, we do get that great line where he says, for centuries I've helped people, I've solved their problems, I've given them visions, and no one has deserved any of it. You are the parasite, Luke. And I think this is the key to understanding why Daniel is doing what he's doing. He is just tired of everyone's bullshit taking what he has done and perverting it in his eyes. And so it's at this point, it's like, you are the actual parasite.
But that's his sense of entitlement. I mean, I know we already touched on
it.
But that line delivery earlier booefore he changes the face, and he's like, I've been kind to you. I've shown you sensitivity. Fuck this whole charade. Like, okay, because you're nice or because you helped Luke do something, you feel entitled to all this shit just because. And I'm like, sorry, that's not how the world works.
Mm-hmm.
This world. Oh, sometimes.
Well,
it's not how it should work.
There we go.
There's not really any more, like, fine strokes here. Yeah, we have a sword fight at the top between fake broomstick things, and you know, while Cassie is schlepping her way down the ladder.
I love that scene. She is just calmly climbing down the ladder as the two of them are duking it out. It made me laugh when I was watching it this time.
I'll confess, this is the part of the film that I don't think is as successful. Like, every time I watch it, I'm always just a little too underwhelmed by this climax. And I get the visual symmetry of the call back to when they were childhood friends. And this was a sense of play, and now it's got these epic life and death stakes to it. But I don't know. Visually, it's not as interesting to me. I don't find the Battle of Wills as compelling. And yeah, it's like, what the fuck is Cassie up to over there?
I'm going to say something. I think Cassie should have been killed. If only because her walking slow as fuck down this ladder is boring. I don't care about what's happening to her.
You didn't walk fast enough. You should have died.
We don't see her again until Daniel hits the ground, and then she's like, oh, I'm just on the last rung. Here we go. No agency from this girl. And this is when we can get into a problematic reading, right? Because what happens here, and this is why I brought up Lights Out earlier, because Lights Out has a similar thing, and spoilers for everybody, but basically...
It's a bit late now.
The character's mother, played by Maria Bello, suffers from depression. The creature in Lights Out is kind of a manifestation of that, but it's her sister. And the problem is solved by Maria Bello slitting her own, or killing herself. I think she slits her own throat. And that gets rid of the depression.
Oh, dear.
Obviously, people were like,
that's not okay.
That's not okay. And so watching this, I was kind of like, I don't think it's the same. But I do think it's treading familiar, similar waters where it's like, okay, well, Daniel makes this choice. He is battling his demons. Luke is battling his demons. If you want to read Daniel as a manifestation of his mental illness, okay, that will complicate this ending a little bit. Because what Luke decides to do is throw him and Daniel off of this ledge, killing him, hoping that it kills Daniel. Yeah. And it doesn't. So Luke's solution to get rid of Daniel / his mental illness is to die by suicide.
Yeah, it's the piece that just doesn't seem as well thought out, or it doesn't work really well with any of the readings that we propose. Like, it doesn't play well with the queer one, it doesn't play well with the mental illness one, and it's kind of underwhelming. Like, I get a sense of pathos, and there's a sense of tragedy that Luke couldn't overcome this, but particularly when we're talking about death by suicide, I'm always really uncomfortable and nervous about depictions in popular media that say it's like, oh, well, he murdered himself. You know, he made this grand sacrifice.
For everyone, to save Cassie, to save everyone else around him.
Yeah, like, let's not do that, please.
And that's why I think the people that have an issue with this, I think this, for some of them, this is a big issue. And that's why I think it's important, or at least for me, listening to Mortimer talk about all the different ways you can read this film. I do think the mental illness is 100% a metaphor that applies here. I don't think the movie is saying here, though, like, oh, you have mental illness, you want to get rid of it? Better kill yourself. I don't get that vibe.
Yeah, it's not being glib like that.
Yes, and I honestly don't feel that way about Lights Out, but I do think that making that connection with Lights Out is a lot easier than it is here. Easier in the sense that, like, you can say, oh yeah, they didn't think this through. Whereas I don't feel like they didn't think it through here, and Daniel isn't real, if that makes any sense.
I don't honestly know what to say about this ending, to be perfectly honest. I think that the intent here is that earlier on, there is the line where Luke is talking about how he is just like his mom, and Daniel replies, no, Luke, you're not. You're something much more interesting. And so I think the movie, at the point when we realize that Daniel is not a manifestation of, you know, repressed trauma, or is not a mental illness, or whatever the case is, he is a physical, spiritual, supernatural being that is tormenting him, and that is contrasted with the plight that his mom is going through, where she is actually seeking help, and she is getting help for her mental illness. So we have two different aspects, and maybe the film doesn't necessarily diverge enough from those for the liking, because I think what you're saying is absolutely true, and it kind of makes this ending very complicated to discuss, and without having to tiptoe around the subject. But I don't think that the intent of the movie, which at the end of the day is kind of meaningless, authorial intent versus what viewers take from it. But I don't think the intent necessarily is to conflate Daniel with the struggle of someone dealing with mental illness.
And I think that's why having the mother is vital.
Yes.
Yeah, because she is that mental health reading. Like, she is the one suffering from it, but she's also getting help, and she's contrasted. Clearly, maybe it could have been done better or more extensively. But yeah, like, you look at her and you're like, oh, okay, well, that's not what Luke is going through.
Well, that's, exactly, right? Because if Luke did what his mother is doing right now, he would not be in a better place.
But I also cannot fault anyone that takes a pessimistic reading of this ending or looking at it as a metaphor for mental illness, because it's there. It's obviously there.
It is up to you, the viewer, to choose which way you want to see this. And at the end of the day, your choice is going to matter on your lived experiences. As every consumption of art, like that's how it always works. So yeah, absolutely, you're 100% right. Now, when it comes to the ending itself, so the one we get, Luke is dead, and Daniel, back in his gross creature form, is alive to go after someone else.
Yeah.
Right?
He lives another day.
There were two other endings that were considered for this. One, child Luke comes back and approaches a lonely kid in a park and becomes his imaginary friend.
Aw, that's kind of sweet.
This ties into a circular narrative, and Mortimer has a very large interest in Buddhism, so that tied into that for him. But it was scrapped because they didn't like the idea of bringing in the child actor to make the last image you see of Luke be not Miles Robbins.
Okay.
The other ending, and this is one that is on the DVD, you can see this one. Adult Luke does come back. He is dead. He goes up to Cassie, and he is saying, "Oh my god, I'm here." She cannot see him. She walks away. The camera is left panning on Luke as he just kind of smiles. He keeps repeating, "I'm here. I'm really here. I'm here." He kind of half chuckles. Cut to black.
Yeah, see, I don't like that at all.
No, that feels a little bit exploitive.
I agree. Well, because that's also saying, oh, so suicide had a positive effect on your life.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. I don't mind the child, like he becomes another imaginary friend for someone else. I don't mind that at all. I think that actually is kind of sweet.
I like it, but I could maybe also see that someone could misinterpret that and be like, oh, he's become a demon now? He's going to haunt that new kid?
Yeah, almost like it's a virus, right?
Yeah. Because part of this does sometimes remind me of that weird Denzel Washington movie, Fallen, where it's like, it's got the creature that body hops and it's mostly interested in just doing killing sprees. It's a very reductive comparison, but we often have films where demons want to get inside of people so that they can make them do bad things. And I mean, hell, the Conjuring franchise, hello, Devil made me do it.
Yep.
And I think that Daniel Isn't Real kind of shits the bed with this ending, but so much of what comes before it is complicated and interesting and worthy of unpacking with its multiplicity of readings that I'm actually willing to forgive the not great ending.
I wouldn't say it shits the bed, but I do think it is one of the weaker aspects of the film, in a film that I think is very, very strong.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also just kind of like, well, I don't know how you would end this. I don't know an ending that would really, truly satisfy me.
I mean, props for not just going with a simple happy ending where he defeats Daniel and gets the girl. That would have been the most obvious way to do it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also would have been unsatisfactory.
Yeah.
Because the sad thing is like Luke isn't strong enough to defeat this character. Like, he barely got his shit together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? That's a good segue to kind of our wrap up, because listeners, we want to know what y'all think of this, because obviously we have spent close to 2 hours unpacking this film, and I don't even think, I mean, we've scratched the surface. I'm sorry, I'll give us that credit. But but there's more. Like, as we said from the top of this episode, there are many ways to read, to analyze, to interpret this film. And I think that's that's one of its strengths, is that there's so many things to discuss. So let us know what you think. Talk about it amongst yourselves. Talk about it, of course, in the Facebook group with each other, politely. But because I want to know, like, what are we not seeing? What did we miss, if anything?
Yeah.
Well, y'all, any final thoughts on Daniel Isn't Real?
It's amazing.
Yeah, it holds up really well. If you haven't seen it in a while, go back and revisit it, because there are lots of layers to unpack here. And if you've only seen it once, like I had before, you probably missed a bunch of stuff.
Yes. Also, really be on the lookout for hidden appearances of Daniel. There's some scenes where you can see his reflection when he's not like actually on screen, but you see him in the reflection. Or right after the deep throating scene, you can actually see creature Daniel walking around the house, not in focus, just like in like your peripheral vision. It's really creepy. So, well, all right. Before we announce what we're covering next week, Terry, first of all, thank you again for joining us for this.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. This was a blast. I love you guys, so.
We love you too. Well, let our listeners know, where can they find you on social media?
Sure. I'm most active on Twitter at Gaily Dreadful. You can also follow my podcast at Scarred for Life on Twitter. And yeah, we're also on Instagram. I'm on Instagram, but I don't understand Instagram. I'm old. Twitter's for me.
It's just pictures. You just post pictures. That's all you do.
Yeah, but you gotta write, and I like to write, and then the space to write is so small. Yeah. Follow me on Twitter.
If listeners would like to give Terry a tutorial on Instagram, please feel free.
Please do.
But do it on Twitter.
Yes. Well, if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at Horror Queers. Please join our Facebook Horror Queers group to hang out with other listeners, and find us on Letterboxd to keep track of all the films we've covered, and of course check out our YouTube channel to watch our Micro Queers minisodes, because those are really fun to watch.
Indeed.
If you have a moment, please rate and review us on your podcatcher of choice. And if you want even more content from the Horror Queers, that being Joe and myself, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/horrorqueers. We're pretty much done with July. We have released everything, so hopefully you've listened to our episodes on the Fear Street trilogy, Till Death, A Quiet Place Part 2, Werewolves Within, and Vicious Fun. I won't give away our full August schedule yet, but let's just say we will definitely be covering Don't Breathe 2, mild excitement / nervousness hesitation for that.
Trepidation?
Yeah, a little bit. And the new Shudder exclusive, The Boy Behind the Door, which, well, I think Terry has seen, and you can tell us it's great, right?
It's intense as hell.
Good.
And I think you'll have a very interesting conversation about what it is and is not.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well, I'm excited to watch and discuss that. But Joe, before we do that, we actually have an episode coming out next week. So what are we talking about next week?
Well, we're going to stick with young people, but it's not going to be quite as serious, Trace. So, folks, we talked about Scary Movie 2 earlier this year, and we opened the floodgates to talk about parody. So we're going to go back and look at one of the original slasher parodies with Student Bodies from 1981.
Woo! I've never seen this. Have you seen this, Joe?
I have not, but I've listened to the Kill by Kill episode on it, and it sounds really stupid fun.
Yeah, that is absolutely what I hear. And I'm excited. I'm borrowing my friend Matt's Blu-ray, and it is a bare bones Blu-ray that includes another film on it.
Yeah, it's one of those. Probably overdue for like a deluxe treatment.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited for this. So yeah, everyone join us for Student Bodies next week. It should be a real delight, and hopefully less offensive than what Scary Movie 2 was.
Oh boy, yeah, we'll see how 1981 jokes have aged.
Oh my god, can you imagine? Well, we will imagine next week.
In just 6 days, yes.
All right, everyone. Well, on that note, I think we can cross out Daniel Isn't Real.
Yes, and cross out Horror Queers.
Hello, I'm Shelby Scott, the host of Scare You to Sleep, a podcast where I tell you spooky bedtime stories full of creepy sound effects and music that is soothing yet unsettling to help immerse you into a world of horror. This is a show for those of us who have realized horror can be a strange but relaxing escape from reality. Speaking of escapes, sometimes I lead you through guided nightmares, like a guided meditation, but instead of flowery meadows, I take you on a journey through your own personal nightmare. So come get lost in the terror with me. Listen to Scare You to Sleep wherever you listen to podcasts, or find us online at bloody.fm. Sweet screams.